In this final segment of Lecture 20, I want to talk to you about 5 different ways that being part of a group changes how we think and behave. Lecture 21 will cover conformity and the pressure to conform to a social group, but we're just going to start here with a little bit of an appetizer of how the power of the group to change who we are. So the first sort of group power dynamic that I want to let you know about is something called social facilitation. Athletes know that how quickly they can run a race or how far they can throw a shot put depends on whether they're being watched. It turns out that if we're doing something that's fairly simple, we perform better if we're being watched. So maybe you train to run a 5K or a 10K race. When there's a crowd of people watching you, you put in your best time. Now, it turns out that the social facilitation only works for simple tasks. If the task is difficult, it doesn't give you an advantage. Here's a study of pool players and social facilitation. In this study, they had 2 groups of subjects, a group of expert pool players and a group of novice pool players, people who are just beginning. And they asked the subjects to perform a simple task, how many balls can you get in the holes of the pool table? Now, it turns out that when the experts were doing this task with observers, experts were better, they were more accurate when people were watching them than when they were shooting pool balls by themselves. The reverse effect was found with novice pool players. With novices, they performed better when they were alone than when they were being watched by a group. The second one is social loafing. And all of my students who have had to do projects for school as part of a team, a joint project, know about social loafing. What is it? If I'm assigned some responsibility as a part of a group, say everybody in my neighborhood is responsible for picking up trash, then the responsibility that each person feels is very small. And so it's very easy to say, I'll let everybody else do it. Right? It's diffusion of responsibility. When there's responsibility for some task or for helping others, that responsibility seems to diffuse or spread across the number of people who are there. So if you have to do a group project as part of a big group, say 10 people in the group, then you only feel 10% of the responsibility. So it's easy to walk away and say, the other people have 90% of the responsibility. That drives people nuts when they're trying to do group projects, but thankfully there's an easy solution. The way you get rid of social loafing is to assign each person in the group 100% responsibility for a particular task or part of the problem that needs to be solved. So then they can't walk away from it because everybody will know, if Joe was responsible for writing the literature review and there's no literature review, it's entirely Joe's fault. That's how you get rid of social loafing. De-individuation. When we can hide our identity, we'll do things that we don't even think we're capable of. And if anybody's ever been bullied online or cyberstalked, they know what I mean. People will say things online that they would never say to another person's face. Sometimes if somebody wants to throw a party and they really want people to relax and not worry about anything, they'll throw a costume party because the mask de-individualizes you. It sort of frees you from worrying about what people think about you because now you're a costume character. The Ku Klux Klan, which is an American racist group that has been murdering and harassing people of color for centuries, when they go out and do awful things, they wear masks, these white clownish masks with the eyes. Why? To take advantage of de-individuation. Group polarization. This is really interesting. It turns out that our beliefs become more extreme if we are part of a group that holds similar beliefs. So imagine you take one person and they're an average Democrat and another person and they're sort of an average Republican. But then you take each of these people and you put them in a group of like people. So maybe you have a moderate Democrat and you put them in a group with other moderate Democrats. What happens to that person? Their opinions shift farther to the left. And if you take a moderate Republican and put them in a group with other Republicans, what happens? Their political beliefs shift farther to the right. It's crazy, but it's what we do. Here is a graph of a study done on prejudice. Prejudice means prejudgment. So to what extent do you prejudge people just because of the way they look or some affiliation that they have? And they took this group of people, and they gave them a test of prejudice, and they divided the group into two parts, a group that had low prejudice and a group that was highly prejudicial. And then they had those two groups have a discussion with each other amongst the groups. And what happened? The prejudiced people became even more prejudiced, and the low prejudiced people became even less prejudiced. Group polarization. When we become part of a group, our opinions become more extreme. And then finally, this is another group effect called group think. Companies will often try to solve a complicated problem by putting a group of people together to solve the problem. And the thought is, well, if I've got 5 different people in the group, I've got 5 different opinions about how to solve the problem, and so we'll come up with the best solution. But groupthink says, no, groupthink tells us it doesn't quite work that way. When you become part of a group, then you have an affiliation. You typically want to feel like part of the group, right? Because we are social animals. It's important for us to be part of groups. And to do that, we give up some of our uniqueness. So it turns out that when people are part of a group, they'll start to coalesce around a single way of thinking. So one way of describing groupthink is many heads, but one mind. So instead of the group talking about all 5 different perspectives on a problem, they will slowly come to agree on just one perspective on the problem. And it's very difficult for people in a group to raise conflicting information. Hey, that's not going to work for this other reason. Instead, we all sort of converge around this one way of thinking. This leads to poor decision making. So for example, back in 2016, all of the talking heads on TV said, oh, Hillary Clinton is for sure going to become the president, not Donald Trump. There was groupthink that happened. They all started to think the same thing. That's it for Lecture 20. There's a big lab for my students for Lecture 20 based on the Milgram study, so make sure to give yourself time for that.